Hello, I'm Elgato and welcome back to another video about Hytale. So Hytale is the game which captured the internet's interest, and I can tell this not only because I know you're interested in the game, but also because 25 million other people have watched the trailer in less than a month. This really shows there is a huge appetite for this sort of game, but there isn't really much information about what's going on until fairly recently, where we've seen even more information come out from the Hytale team. This was a post on their website where they explain how world generation is going to work, and this is a really big part of any block-based style game. How exactly will the world generate? And we've got a lot of really juicy information that I want to share with you all because we've seen a lot of brand new screenshots and a lot of information regarding Hytale, including the fact that it's going to be set on the world of Orbis. So here's a piece of concept art to describe how the generation gets progressively more difficult, and to me that sounds super exciting, so let's dive straight into it. Like this video if you do like it, but let's start by talking about Orbis and why this is such an intriguing concept, because it is going to be split into multiple different zones. So at first you would assume the zones are kind of like biomes, because you can see how zone 1 is kind of more green and lush and zone 2 is more deserty and then snowy and then lava, etc. But the truth is, zones will encompass a bunch of different biomes, a bunch of different blocks, natural structures, NPCs, pretty much everything will change from zone to zone, and within each zone you can find different biomes. So for instance, here's zone 1, you can see it does have some forest, you can see it does have a little lake as well as an island biome, it does have some ravines, it has all these different structures, etc. Within the one different zone. So why exactly are there different zones then, if every single zone is basically like an entire, say, Minecraft world? Well, the reason you're going to have different zones is presumably to have a progression between the zones. Zone 1 is easier than zone 2, which is easier than zone 3, which is easier than zone 4, which we can tell not only because, the numbers go up by 1, and zone 4 is literally this lava castle which seeps into everything, but also looking at the caves, you can see how, like, oh yeah, zone 1 has some fairly simple caves, zone 2 gets a bit more complex, zone 3 gets quite a lot more challenging with ice caves, etc., and zone 4 is just a nightmare down there, which gives you the real idea that, like, oh yeah, as you further progress, as the storyline progresses, you go into more and more zones. We don't know how big a zone will be, how easy it is to go to a different zone, whether that be random, whether you can go straight from zone 1 to 3, but we assume that there's going to be a zone 1, followed by a zone 2, followed by a zone 3, if you want to up the difficulty for yourself, which is something that is presumably going to be a part of the storyline in Hytale. So yeah, now let's, we've shown you zone 1, let's show you zone 2, we've got a few different screenshots of that one, and as you can see, zone 2 definitely has a more, kind of scary, intimidating feel than zone 1, not by much, it's still fairly common, but you can start to see how, like, oh yeah, well, zone 2, it's definitely a more tricky one to survive, and it's a trickier one to get certain things done in, and you can then imagine how, like, oh yeah, it's also made from entirely different blocks, which have entirely different uses. Then it's going to be the same for zone 3, which we've only really seen, like, a tiny edge of a screenshot, as well as some of the caves that you can find down there. But yeah, that's basically the zone system explained in Hytale. It sounds really amazing to me because I love the concept of the game getting harder as you go out. The biggest problem, in my opinion, with Minecraft's generation is after a few thousand blocks, you've probably seen it all because it just starts to loop after that. Whereas in this system, like, there are different zones which have different generations, and it'll be kind of exciting to have the game actually get more difficult and scale with you. Sometimes you want to go back a zone, maybe, and like, build up your defenses or build up your extra, your armor, find better weapons in various different dungeons, which is going to move us into the second point, because now we've spoken about the zones, we've spoken about how Orbis is going to work. Let's speak about what is found within each zone and why you might want to explore them, because again, as someone who loves exploration, this gets me really, really hyped that there are so many different structures you can find. They actually explicitly said there is over 3,000 different prefabs so far, and although a lot of these are trees and such, that means there are so many unique structures you can find, with some of them being specifically designed to spawn once in any given Hytale world. Every single world is random, it should be clarified, but it's in that world you can find some of these structures just the one time. That sounds amazing, and some of these are fairly normal dungeons like you expect from a lot of games with procedurally generated worlds. But one of the things that I found interesting, besides just like, wow, look at these dungeons which have the the reward room at the end, you gotta kind of solve them, a little bit scary me where there's multiple paths that eventually end up in the right place. But the thing I find amazing is it's not just regular dungeons that you see in a lot of games, and that would be a lot of fun by themselves, but there's also something called the portal dungeons. So this is a fairly unique concept because you can find certain structures above the ground which will lead you to a portal dungeon. If you meet the requirements to unlock one, then you can go down below the surface like you can see here, and you can go into one of these portals. The portals take you to an entire other dimension, which I start to imagine being like the Super Mario Sunshine worlds where you're separate to the world. But just in case you're not familiar with those, here is the concept art they've shown, and in these separate different dimension dungeons, once you go through these portals, you get a whole separate area where certain blocks can't be broken, certain blocks can't be placed, etc. There are real hard limits on you, and if you can solve these, then you'll get obviously a much bigger reward. So that is a super hype concept. Again, just looking at all of these different portal dungeons, they're all going to have different enemies to get through. They're going to have different puzzles, different layouts, different everythings. But the fact that there's going to be multiple portal dungeons with their own separate multiple challenges is really, really, really exciting. exciting, but it's not the end about what we learned about the generation in Hytale, because we also know there are going to be some, big oceans, which they effectively describe as being their own separate zones, sort of, that can spawn in any given zone, because, again, here is a ocean, in, I assume, Zone 2. As you can see, it's going to have its whole own set of its own prefab structures. It's going to have a whole own set of blocks down there, as well as a lot of different things that you can find. So exactly how the underwater system will work is slightly beyond us, but what they have said is there is going to be some deep oceans that will provide their own separate rewards, which is going to be a really exciting thing, that like, oh yeah, even the oceans have their own caves and their own sets of loot and their own sets of everything, which is a really exciting premise, as far as I'm concerned. So I feel like what we need to now kind of take a step back and address is like the fact that the Hytale world is going to be mostly designed in a way that it is, it's random every time, but it's random with a very clear progression for the most part. And at first, again, based on all the screenshots, it does seem as though the world is going to be very finite so that it can be controlled in that way. A lot of games do this as a way to properly control what's in there. Most games are not infinite, but what they have clarified, which I found interesting, is that the world doesn't just stop after you find all the zones which exist. The world actually has a world past that called the Infinite Land. So the world is technically going to be infinite, however, there's going to be a key part of it, the part where all the zones are very carefully designed, picked, and balanced, and all those sorts of things. There's going to be a part of the world like that where all of the main things will take you. There is a storyline in Hytale, which I find to be a fascinating thing by itself, but this storyline will take you, for the most part, within the main parts of the world. However, after that, they have confirmed there will be an Infinite Lands, which will go on forever if you want to do that. Or at least they'll go on for, I assume, functionally forever. There might be like some weird end at 1,000,000 blocks, but if you want to explore an infinite game, if you want to walk 100,000 blocks, 1,000,000 blocks, 10 million blocks, you can do that, but the majority of the game won't necessarily require that. The majority of the game will have the clear progression, and I'd really like to learn more about that at some point in the future, because again, the infinite thing is something a lot of people do love, but personally, I'm excited about all the things that we've heard about here, not because of the infinite thing, like, there is an infinite block building game out there, and, it's not the most fun to go out to the infinite, but what's more fun to me is having a handcrafted world with a clear difficulty, with clear progressions in what armors and items and weapons, etc. you can get, with a clear progression of the blocks, which can show you've been there and which you can use to make different things, presumably. The fact that there is a clear progression and a clear way to go forwards is something I think I'll really enjoy. I don't know for sure how the, the replayability will be in single player. Maybe it is a game that you can just full on complete, or maybe that, once you've completed the storyline, there's just things to go on from there. We don't know how that will work for sure. That's a big question mark that would, needs to be answered. But in the meantime, as far as the world generation goes, I am really excited, and here's the best thing, right? So we've seen Zone 1, 2, 3, 4. We've seen how the caves get more challenging, the structures get crazier, the world generation gets insane. Like, Zone 4 is literally a lava castle on this map, it looks like, but there are 2 more zones yet to be announced based on this thing. There is a Zone 5 and a Zone 6 we're going to hear about soon, and this is why I am excited for Hytale. I love that they are rapidly working on so much, and they're trying to make a really fun single-player experience, which is going to be, crafted in such a way that there is a clear progression system, there is a clear sense of exploration, and a lot of the feelings which, personally I enjoy in a lot of other games will be coming to the block-based game format, which sounds amazing to me. I really am looking forward to this, because even the tiny glimmers of games which I haven't necessarily enjoyed, like Portal Knights, for instance, it has, this kind of fun concept, but the worlds are literally 100 blocks, and there's a whole bunch of issues that arise there. Having the infinite style game, having a, more fun combat system based on what we've seen, with weapons and loot that actually gets stronger as you go along, combined into a very carefully crafted world with very carefully crafted difficulties, to me that sounds like a lot of fun. Again, the longevity, all those questions do come up, but for now, I am really, really excited. I cannot wait to see Zone 5 and Zone 6 and see exactly what's inside of those, and this is something that we might be doing more from this channel, because again, a lot of people have this whole thing of like, it's gotta be one or the other, this or Minecraft or something. I think both games, necessarily need to coexist, because even though this is made by Hypixel, who know the Minecraft community, I would argue better than Minecraft themselves, even in spite of that fact, I would say that, because they're launching in very different ways for different platforms, this will obviously take a lot of the, Java edition community away from the PC, but it's not necessarily going to replace all Minecraft on all platforms. I think this is going to be a really fun game to play, and I'm excited to do so, and I'll be doing that on this channel. And if you want to see more of these videos, make sure you subscribe with notifications turned on so you see more Hytale news when this happens. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all later in my live stream and also Q&A Saturday. So goodbye.